Welcome to SIR Studios, Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Jaclyn Dwyer. Sorry, let me ask a question. I meant to ask you this before. How do you pronounce, is it Thibodaux, Louisiana?
It's Thibodaux.
Thibodaux, got it. Okay.
Yeah, the H is silent.
Yep,
Yeah.
Thibodaux. Yep, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there was something I was going to ask, and I'm glad I remembered. I had a grad school colleague from New Orleans, and I think his dog was named Thibodaux, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So where is that?
Yeah, it's a very common family name down here.
Where is that in relation to New Orleans?
It's about an hour south.
Okay. In my mind, there's an hour south of New Orleans. It's the middle of the Gulf, but clearly I don't have.
Yeah, with that, there's really like not much between here and New Orleans. It's like cane fields and bayous and swamp, and then there's a town.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So I will restart here now that I knew there was something I wanted to ask. I'm glad I didn't get there and then say
yeah.
it. Okay. Let's take two. Welcome to SIR Studios Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Jaclyn Dwyer, whose story, Lightning Seasons, is featured in the spring 2024 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Jaclyn Dwyer's work has appeared in Electric Literature, Ploughshares, Cincinnati Review, Blackbird, The Pinch, and Prairie Schooner, among others. Her poetry collection, The Bride Aflame, was published by Black Lawrence Press. She lives in Thibodaux, Louisiana, with her husband and 4 children. Jaclyn, welcome to Inside the Issue.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about your story.
I'm going to read just a...
No, I said I was excited to talk about your story. So yeah, if you want to read a little from the beginning of the story somewhere, that'd be great.
That'd be great. Yeah. So it's not quite the beginning, maybe like a couple paragraphs down, but towards the beginning. By the time I found out I was pregnant, Brady was studying abroad in Barcelona, eating tapas, plucking green olives with a miniature fork, and spitting the pits in the tiny white dishes. The number I had for him was disconnected. I couldn't tell him, hey, guess what? You're going to be a dad in an email. And I certainly couldn't tell my mother, who planted 10 azaleas along our front walk to water her morning rosary. So I Googled unexplained pregnancy and found a place. Cut Off, Louisiana was the kind of town that sounded like the perfect place to start over. A blank slate, nearly empty by the time I arrived. Even families who'd been there for generations fled the seasonal lightning storms. Electricity clustered overhead, and a glowing haze ruptured through the sky. If you stayed, you were bound to get struck. Some people said it was the soil, iron-rich silt that yielded rows and rows of waving sugarcane and sweet red watermelons every summer. Others believed it was angels doing God's work, sending down life when people needed it most. I never really believed in angels. Christmas Eve, when other girls floated in cranberry velvet lined with lace, my mother dressed my sisters and me in oversized t-shirts with tissue paper wings that melted in the snow. She belted us at the waist with gift wrap ribbon and draped dish towels over our heads that she secured by sweatbands in a drab pageantry of angels and Marys. As the oldest, I was always a Mary. And years when my mother had a new baby, I did get to carry my littlest sister to the altar for a holiday blessing. Next Christmas, the baby in my arms will be my own, unless I did something about it. For a few weeks each summer, the cutoff sky targets women. During lightning season, women abandon grocery carts for their cars or tiptoe in fishing boots and rubber gloves to pull letters and bills from their mailboxes, fearful of the skies. Once struck, each woman turns up with a branching pink scar as if all their blood vessels were brought to the surface. No one knows how it happens or why, but nearly all of them turn up pregnant. The local papers boast of seasonal baby booms that stretch the maternity wards and force many women to labor at home. I knew that if I came home from college pregnant with no ring, not even a real boyfriend, my mother might stick a kitchen knife in each hand to damn herself with a homespun stigmata. So I had to figure out a plan to save us both.
All right, thank you. No, that's a that section of the story it lays things out nicely, right? We're very clearly set up and kind of going on this journey with this character. I like that a lot. So can you tell us a little bit about what, kind of a quick summary of this story? Tell us what it's about.
Yeah, so it's about this girl who has this kind of like one night stand in a kind of like scandalous public way that becomes a bit of like rumor mill fodder for classmates. And she feels really embarrassed and ashamed by this, especially given like her religious upbringing. And she, really likes this guy, but he maybe probably doesn't really like her back. And so she feels kind of stuck with what to do in moving forward this pregnancy. And so she decides to go to this town where she reads about this like somewhat magical or mysterious lightning that where women end up getting struck by lightning and end up pregnant. So she thinks, oh, if I can just go get myself struck by lightning, that'll like explain this pregnancy away and solve all my problems. So that's what she does. And there she, meets some people and ends up kind of finding her way through this pregnancy and this maybe relationship with this potential, person and kind of sorting through like her family as well and like finding out who she is in the midst of all of this.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was, as you were reading, I was sort of, this caught my attention. The line, as the oldest, I was always a Mary. And that's a really nice sort of, it has like thematic overtones as the story progresses, because her baby was not immaculately conceived, but she's attempting something to cover it with some magical, pretend it was immaculately conceived. That comes up a couple times in the story. I think that was handled really nicely. The Catholicism is just in the background, but it's enough to remind us that what this character is going through. Yeah, so I'm really interested, especially because of this location and the, as you mentioned, sort of almost magical or mythical place. Where did this story come from? What's the genesis of this one?
So I think, and I'm not really sure, so don't hold me to facts, but I think this happened when I was in college. I'm thinking like 15-ish years ago, like 2008, 9-ish era, that I think an incident like this happened that was in the school newspaper. And I remember reading about it and thinking, wow, I wonder what it's like to be that girl. And I'm gonna like kind of file that away and write that story one day. And it's always just kind of been lurking in the background. And it's taken me this long to actually write about that experience. And honestly, it's been so long that like I think it really happened when I was at college, but I'm doubting the veracity of that. So if it didn't actually happen at any of those schools, then maybe I just made it up. But I think that's what happened. At least that's how I remember it. And it's just been kind of filed back there. And I didn't really actually start writing the story until like 2020. We moved in the middle of the pandemic from Ohio to Louisiana. And it was a really hectic time to move. Everything was shut down. And so we couldn't go anywhere or explore really much of anything or meet people. And so I just started thinking about like the places on the map near me and looking at the landscape. And, there are these really vivid, very, very beautiful lightning storms. Like when we get thunderstorms in Louisiana, they are really kind of magical. I mean, the kind of lightning that you see in postcards just like cracks through the sky all around you. And that's something that I didn't really understand until I lived here. My husband's from Louisiana, and he used to say when we lived in Ohio, like, oh, I miss the thunderstorms. And I had no idea what he meant. He'd say, oh, we don't get real thunderstorms here. And I didn't understand it because I'm like, oh, there's thunderstorms here. But it is a very different kind of storm down here. And so that was kind of what made like those two things like coming together kind of brought the story about.
That's really cool when that happens, when you've got, something filed away in a notebook or an observation, or you have an idea or heard something, and then you find that on it, that like the anecdote about the reading about this young woman in a school newspaper, that's like, it makes sense that you noted that, right? But then you're like, what do you do with that? I mean, there's, and then when you find that sort of other part, that other thing that gives that initial idea a place to move and grow. That's really cool when those things line up. And sometimes it takes time, right? It takes 15 years. Yeah. So it was I'm guessing that most stories don't take 15 years for you, but
No.
how was the process for this one? Similar or different than, I guess once you started writing, how was the process different or similar to what's typical for you?
So when I write a story, I usually do start with an ending. And I find myself kind of writing towards that ending, and I'll usually have like an image and like a kind of emotional kind of feel or resonance or kind of know where like what place the story is going to end in. And I had a little bit of that. I had a kind of like feel like I wanted to kind of like resolve like that she had kind of come to terms with what was going on and like really coming to terms with the pregnancy and this relationship with this person. But I wasn't sure like what action or event or like image or like I didn't have any of that. And so as far as like the writing of the story, I revised the story was bigger. It was longer, and I probably ended up cutting like a lot more like side characters and like giving them less space and really to like streamline it, focus on the main character a lot more. And also there were some moments like with the mother and like the family and like a lot of like backstory. And so again, I cut a lot of that out in revision. But I spent probably the most time and most trouble with the ending because I wasn't quite sure where I wanted it to go. And in some previous versions, it was like unclear what happened at the end, and so I felt like that was confusing. In some versions it kind of seemed like she ended up having like a kind of miscarriage, and then also like the interaction between her and this other mother she meets in the town, what happens between them kind of like shifted and changed somewhat because I wasn't even sure like what role. I knew that in interacting with her it was going to help the main character come to terms and like kind of reach her ending, but I didn't know like what that interaction looked like even through like, and this is like very rare for me. I don't think I've ever done that before, but when I got like the initial proofs for the story and the issue, I like had a complete like revelation like no, that's not the right ending. And I rewrote the ending like the several paragraphs and like changed it like significantly, I would say. Um, and I don't usually do that. And I'm really grateful for the editor for Ron for like allowing me to do that. Because I'm usually just like, oh yeah, like very few like small like grammar check proofreading. Like I don't usually like actually do revisions that far into a story. And this time I did. And I feel really glad to have had that opportunity, and also that like it feels better where it's at now than where it was when I even initially submitted it.
Yeah, I mean it has a very, I mean, and a lot of times, literary short stories don't always do this, but yours has, a pretty definitive ending. I mean, we don't of course know what the narrator and Brady or what's going to happen, but she's clearly, the story ends with, I mean, so throughout the story, um well, not throughout the story, but the beginning, Brady sends her like a fruit of the month kind of thing, which I think is just like a perfect detail because, it's well-meaning, but weird that he would do, like you recognize like he feels like, oh, I got to do something. And it's, I don't know. I love it. And then, but it ends up working really nicely because we've got, the main character, the narrator keeps, she has like a pregnancy app on her phone and she's checking, like a lot of women do, checking the size as the fetus is growing. And the end of the story is, send kumquats, I say, our baby's size of kumquat. So it ties together really nicely. And then she tells us, I gave him my mother's address. So we know she's leaving and going home and facing this pregnancy head on. So
Mhm.
it does have a very, I would call it a very sort of definitive ending because she makes this very clear choice. And we don't always get that in stories. I think sometimes, writers, for better or worse, tend to stop just short of that. And I kind of like that this one, that we have this
Mhm.
character making this choice that there's no question that what she's going to do. Did she
Thank
ever?
you.
Yeah, I mean, in the revisions, did she, or in the thinking about the story, did she ever get struck by lightning? Was that ever a thing that happened?
So in some of the versions, there's like the lightning is striking. It's not clear whether it's striking her or it's striking the woman with her, but it is like around them. And in a lot of the earlier versions, she like loses the baby, and it's like basically like a miscarriage for her. And I didn't, or like, or something's happening where it's like maybe it's not clear if it's a miscarriage, but it could be a miscarriage the way I had described it. And I didn't really like that ending because it just felt like then it's just like eliminating the problem, and it's just like kind of like now she doesn't have to deal with it. She doesn't have to tell him. She doesn't have to tell her mother. And so that didn't feel like it was the right place I wanted her to have to actually like confront this thing in some way and find a way of like uh, moving forward with it.
Yeah, I think I think you made the right choice for sure. Um,
Thanks.
so one of the things that I was really that I really sort of enjoyed. I mean, I like the story, right from the beginning. Um, and my attention never wavered at all throughout it. But one of the things that I think you do really well in the story is you balance. We have this almost possibly magical, possibly mystical sort of legend in this town, right? This cut off Louisiana where women get struck by lightning and become pregnant. And we don't know, no one, I mean, everybody in town seems to accept that, but you know, we never know, which I think is really cool. But it's plausible, but it's also borderline mystical. And I just think that balance of that is really nice. And I'm curious how conscious you were of that as you were either writing or revising.
So I don't know that that was initially in like one of my like first drafts. I think a lot of times when I start with a character and again I usually have like a kind of ending of like kind of direction to like what I'm writing towards. But often like as I like start writing and start like, getting into like the draft, I feel like there's something missing, and usually I wouldn't even think of myself as a writer that uses a lot of supernatural, but then when I look at the stories, it's like, oh, there's something in that one, there's something in that one, there's something in that one. Like I don't set out to have that be a factor in the story usually, but I reach a point where it's like I need some other element, like something's not working, like it needs something. And then often it's that kind of like supernatural, somewhat plausible element that kind of fills that need, and that's kind of what happened with this story as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the neighbor who owns the house that
Hmm.
our narrator is renting out for her time there. That she says her husband's like on an oil rig, but we never know. And
Hmm.
she has five very young children, and by the end, she's the one who takes our narrator out into like a kind of a clearing or a space that seems to be where women go to be struck. And I just
Yeah.
like that we never really know if we don't know about her. We don't know if it's, I don't know. I think it's, and maybe it works really well because we get such a definitive character, like the arc of the character, has a very final ending in the sense that she makes this very clear choice. But yet there are parts of the story that are completely mysterious. And maybe it's the combination of those two that work really well together.
Yeah, and I feel like I generally don't like stories that do that, but I felt like it was okay here because she doesn't know, like
Mhm.
she's kind of suspect that this woman is not really all that she's saying she is or pretending to be, and that there's something kind of odd, but it also kind of fits in with the culture where, a lot of the husbands who might work on the oil rigs, they are gone for long periods of time, and so you just don't see them. And so it's possible that he just has like a long contract, and so maybe it makes sense, or maybe all of these children are just born from the lightning storms, and that's the story she tells. It's never really clear to the
Yeah.
to the narrator, so she doesn't find out, so like the readers don't have like a definitive answer there. That's why I wanted more like grounding in some other areas, like to have like that ending be a little bit more like on a solid footing, so that we are sure of some things here.
Yeah, there's that really um I don't know. I think I read it as a very like honest ending, or I mean honest bit in the story where when she's working at the library and the mother comes in kind of a little overwhelmed by the kids and needing, there's supposed to be story hour, but it's canceled because of the season. And she gets the narrator to read, and she's like, I need to go to the bathroom. And she goes to the bathroom and like leaves the kids. And the narrator has this moment where she remembers hearing about, a baby being stolen, but in a kind of a similar situation. And she wonders, like, is this woman abandoning her kids? in this, and I
Mhm.
don't know, I think that's a really deftly handled moment because, clearly the mother loves her kids, but it can be overwhelming. I mean, we have one kid, but even one kid, it can be overwhelming or not anymore so much when he was little. And, I don't know, that moment just struck me as very handled really well because there's a little bit of, kind of tension there because we don't know what's going to happen. But I don't know, it struck me as very, I don't know, a very honest part of that scene I really like too. Um,
When I was hoping in that scene too, it was like for me to a way for the narrator to kind of like try on motherhood in some way. Like she's holding that baby and like asking the baby to like call her mom.
hmm,
Like, and so maybe kind of like inching her towards maybe a little bit of acceptance towards the pregnancy or like seeing like what would this be like? Because she sees this woman who's presumably by herself. Like she has the husband nominally, but he's never there to help her. And so she's not really sure what's going to happen with Brady. Like she kind of imagines what kind of father he might be if he would be present or active. And so she might end up having to go it alone and what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel
mhm.
like?
Yeah. Um, so, are there any, as you were developing as a writer, were there any foundational books or writers for you? I know you write poetry as well, so it can be any genre.
Yeah, so when I first started like writing, I started by reading, and when I was first reading I was in college and Oprah's book club was still very popular,
Mhm.
and you'd go to the library and get like the little pamphlet brochure that listed all of Oprah's book club books. And so I was reading a lot through those, and I was also reading a lot of Joyce Carol Oates. I was assigned Where Are You Going? Just by chance. Everyone got a story in AP Lit. And I was assigned Where Are You Going? Where Are You Been? And I think that might have been the first story that I'd ever read by Joyce Carol Oates, but I really enjoyed it in part because I was so perplexed by the ending. And we have a really great community college where I'm from, and she was giving an event, like a reading at the community college, like a writers conference. And I remember going to that and being so impressed that it's like, wow, you can go see like live authors like you go to a concert. And so I decided to then when I went to the library, like just read all of the Joyce Carol Oates books on the shelf and just like read all of her books. I really like connected with a lot of the young adolescents and the way she is so direct and honest and really brings you inside their lives and those characters. And so so that's kind of like a go-to favorite, although I could not keep up with reading all of them.
No,
Um,
I don't
and
know.
then later I think as far as like some of the more supernatural elements, I really enjoyed Kirsten Valdez Quaid and Karen Russell. And I go to their stories again and again. It's harder for me these days to read novels. I don't have as much time. So I love reading short stories. And so I read short stories. I like to skip around and read a lot of like the best of anthologies. I like reading the push carts every year, especially because it's like multi-genre.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned uh Quaid and Russell, and I think that makes sense. Especially Quaid, because I think she does a lot of, or at least to my remembrance, does a lot of kind of what this story does, right? Where it's
Hmm.
um yeah, where everything, nothing is completely implausible, but there's these little moments that feel um, you know, possibly mythical or possibly magical. And I think too, like I said too, with the Catholicism in the background of the story, there's something mystical about that too, right? Some of the
Yeah.
beliefs. So that fits really nicely. What about any writers beyond the ones you've already? I mean, I think everybody who's going to know about Joyce Carol Oates probably knows about her. But I think Quaid and
Yes.
both should be read more. On top of those two, who else should we be reading that we don't
I don't
read?
know.
But
I do read a lot of poetry. I get the Best American each year, and I use that and when I'm teaching, 'cause I teach poetry once a year. Um, I don't I don't know if I can think of any just now.
I use the push cart in my classes. I teach an advanced workshop, and
Hmm.
it's a multi-genre class, and the push cart works just really, really well for that. And I always tell them, like, I don't read the stories or poems ahead of time. I read them when I assign
Mhm.
them, mainly because I don't have time to read through it all. But I don't think I mean, there's occasionally where there'll be something in there that I'm a little indifferent about, but by and large, that one I'm not disappointed. And whereas
Well,
I've used in the past, I'd used like Best American or O. Henry, and those I found myself being a little less like Best American Stories, kind of underwhelmed. Where Pushcart, I don't find that to be the case as often.
well, and one thing I really love about the push cart is they have a pretty long list in the back of like all the honorable mentions. And so I like to go to those as well and like read those as well,
Yeah.
which I appreciate.
Yeah, no, and we like Pushcart too because as a literary journal, it's the one we're gunning for, trying to get
Yeah.
work
Mhm.
get work in there. So if you don't mind talking about it, what are you working on now?
So I'm working on a few other short stories, and I'm working on some essays. I haven't written essays in probably like 10 years. It's been a long time, but I've started writing some essays about my life in Louisiana. We were hit pretty hard by Hurricane Ida, and that was about a year after we moved. It was kind of a shock moving, and moving during the pandemic was difficult. And then we got hit by the hurricane, and that was its own kind of, challenge. And so when, I feel like we've really just kind of, at least me personally, just kind of recovered from that. And so now I feel like I have some perspective to be able to write about that. And so I've been writing some essays about those experiences. It's a really interesting place. There is a lot of like mystique and like a lot of folklore in this town. It's like really small town. As I was saying, it's like we're like an hour south of New Orleans, but there's not very much between New Orleans and here. It's a lot of cane fields and swamps, and there's a lot of myths and folklore associated with the place, which I just find really interesting. And so
Oh,
I'm working on some essays about living here.
I know that's yeah, I've never been there, but I mean, it's so much older than what probably outsiders or people tend to think of, like that, has such a deep, much older history than we think of the founding of the country. So that's, yeah, I can imagine there's a lot to explore with that for sure. Um,
Yeah.
okay, great. So I appreciate it. It was great talking with you. So you can find Lightning Season in our upcoming issue, the spring 2024 issue. You can find it available there. Um, and you can also check out issues at usi.edu/SIR to pick up a copy of the issue and to read Lightning Season. Thank you so much, Jaclyn, for talking with you. It was great to hear about the insides of the story.
Thank you. Thank you for the series and for hosting me today.
All right, I appreciate it. We'll see everybody on the next one. Thanks.
Great.